All right, welcome to the first half of the last chapter, and it's going to be on finance. So some of the stuff that we do in this chapter is going to be kind of basic. Some of this stuff is going to be a little bit more fun to compute, okay? So if you're ever having any trouble typing things into your calculator or looking for online calculators, please reach out and ask, okay? You don't need to struggle with this chapter on your own, or maybe it'll be easy for you, in which case that's great. But if it's not, that's fine too. So we're going to start with simple interest. And, kind of the goal of this whole chapter is to give you some like financial literacy, give you some insight into how a lot of the mathematics work between things like interest, annuities, like retirement accounts, loans, car payments, house payments, that kind of stuff. Okay. So some of you, this will be very familiar, and some of you have not thought about this at all, okay? So there's a wide range, and it's okay no matter where you're at. We're going to start with some simple interest, which I think everyone has some kind of level of experience with. And then again, we're going to go deeper and deeper and deeper after that. So a couple of terms. When we mention principal is basically the amount that you're loaning. It's the amount of that you're depositing. It's the starting amount. There's a couple different ways of talking about principal depending on which specific application we're going to be talking about. Okay. And the interest, that's the extra money that you have to pay when you're borrowing something, or maybe it's the extra amount that you get paid when you deposit something, but it's the extra amount and it depends on the interest rate. And a very, very important thing that you can either write here or you can write down here is that the interest rate always needs to be a decimal. I'm not writing decimal by hand because I can't. But you write decimal right here in your notes. The interest rate has to be a decimal. So like a lot of times, right, we'll say, oh, interest rate is 6%. But this is not our R value. Okay, so you always need to convert, just like we did at the beginning of the quarter, convert that 6% to a decimal. And this is going to be our R value in these problems. So do not forget to convert it to a decimal, right? Convert percents to decimals. Basically, almost always. That being said, if you type in 6 with the percent in your calculator, it should still work out, depending on what kind you have. Okay, so let's get into this. So this is just our simplest application of interest is, hey, I'm going to borrow some money. I'll pay you back with this much interest. Okay. And then we'll get into more complicated stuff. So we have a formula here. I equals, here, let me zoom in a little bit. Ooh, a little bit, not a lot of bit. I equals P naught or P0. Usually we'll say P naught, N-O-T. Actually, I don't know if it is N-O-T. Is it N-A-U-G-H-T? Who knows? P naught times R. So P naught is that principal that we talked about. So that's the amount that's getting loaned or borrowed. Okay. So if I'm borrowing $200 from you, P naught is 200. And then the interest. So the interest is equal to that, how much we're borrowing times the interest rate. Or you can calculate the total amount that needs to get paid back, the principal with interest, A, total amount that needs to get paid back using this formula of P naught times 1 plus the interest rate. There are a couple of ways of thinking about this. So we're going to start with example 7.1. And suppose a city is building a new children's park and issues bonds to raise the money to build it. So Sally obtains a $1,000 bond, and that bond pays 3.5% interest annually, and it matures in 6 years. Okay. And again, there's something to be said for bonds that have very low interest rates because of inflation, but we're not going to talk about that right now. We're just going to solve the problem. So the part A, how much interest will Sally earn after 1 year? So we're going to use the interest formula to figure out what is this interest. So interest is equal to P naught times R. We're going to write that down. 7.1, part A. Interest is equal to P naught times R. P naught is that principal. Okay, what is the original loan for? It's a $1,000 bond here. Okay, that's our P naught. Times our interest rate, R. Now it said 3.5%, but remember 3.5%, that is not, we want R to be as a decimal. Okay, so when we write down R, 3.5%, convert that to a decimal. And remember, you just move the decimal point 2 to the left. The decimal point is now here, and there's a 0 right before the 3.5. This is our R value. This is our R value. Okay, 0.035. And this is going to be how much interest she's going to earn after a single year. Right? If you're getting 3.5 interest every year, well, then after 1 year, you just have 3.5% of 1,000 for your interest. Okay, and a lot of times when we say of in math, that means multiplication. So if you multiply this out, 1, 2, 3, we get $35. So in a year of this bond, she's making $35 in interest. That's the simple one-time interest formula. Now, things can get a little more complicated with interest if we do things year after year. So in part B, what are we looking at? What is the total interest Sally earns when the bond matures in 6 years? Okay, well, now she's making 3.5% again, and 3.5% again, and 3.5% again. They're making multiple 3.5%. But in this case, this is simple interest. It's not compound interest. We'll talk more about compound interest later. And here, we're not going to be making interest on our interest. And if that's a weird sentence to you, don't worry about it. We'll explain that in the third video of today. Okay. So we're just using the simple interest formula, is that every year she is making this 3.5%. Every year she's making $35. Okay. This is what's known as the simple interest formula, which is different from compound interest. Okay, so then in part B, in 6 years, she's making $35 every year. On interest for 6 years, according to this simple one-time interest formula. So in 6 years, it's going to be just 6 times 35, which is going to be $210. And then the last problem, part C, is asking, what is Sally's end amount? What is the principal with interest? Well, the principal was 1,000. The total interest we said was 2,000. Whoa, we wish. $210. So this is just going to be 1,000 plus 210. This end result A is going to be $1,210. That's that A value in that formula. So this is how you calculate simple interest, simple one-time interest. And then here we actually started getting a little bit into simple interest over time with this example. And I'm going to be honest with you, these first two videos, simple interest is not used very frequently. Most of the time we're using compound interest. But simple interest can be a really good way to approximate compound interest, because as we're going to find out, when we get to compound interest is harder to do in your head. Compound interest is going to be much more, it requires a formula that's more complicated. It requires usually a calculator, whereas this is something that you can kind of run some numbers in your head, maybe depending on how numerical your brain works. and get a pretty good idea of how things work. But usually most things in life are not simple interest. But it's a starting point. It's a good estimate. Good luck.